Electoral reform has been in the minds of many people for a long time. Voting on the internet is one of the technologies some municipalities have adopted. We will hear now from Stephen Hayuk from the city of Markham, Ontario, Guillermo Ferrero from the city of Nanaimo, and John Jack, Executive Council Member of the Hu-Ayat First Nations.
My job here is to just provide a little bit of context, and how I'm going to do that is I'm going to offer you some data, and hopefully your eyes won't glaze over. More importantly, I hope you're going to be shocked and alarmed. I love this quote, that the death of democracy is not likely to be an assassination from ambush. It'll be a slow extinction from apathy, indifference, and undernourishment, and I think my data is going to show you why we should be thinking about this. So I have a couple questions for you. So what was the average voter turnout in the last local government election in British Columbia? Yeah, 29.55%. So what community in BC had the highest voter turnout? Bowen Island. Yeah, Bowen Island. Bowen Island, and what was the percentage? Yeah, 84%. What community had the lowest voter turnout? Langford. Yeah, Langford. What was the percentage? 13%. Overall, this is a pretty abysmal showing across the province, in my view. So are we alone in this in local government? No, we're not. Here is some federal data from Confederation, 1867 to now. The red line is the percentage of registered voters. The 2008 election had the lowest percentage turnout in history since Confederation. Now, in the next election, there was a bit of a bump up, but we are on a steady decline federally, and we should be alarmed. Are we alone in Canada in this? No. Here's some data from France, the United Kingdom, and the United States, and you'll see from about the mid-1980s across the Western world, there's a decline in voter turnout. We're not alone. Where does Canada sit internationally? Here are 17 countries and their voter turnouts in their last national election. Well, you know what? Canada ranks 16th out of 17 countries. And you know what? We have even a worse voter turnout than the United States. We like to be so smug about this. But actually, the voter turnout in the United States is higher than here nationally. So why don't people vote? Elections Canada has done some really good research on this, and there really is a myriad of reasons why people choose not to vote. But this data is all available on the Elections Canada websites. What I did was just sort of loosely gathered the reasons that had something related to accessibility, and that's where the red little arrows are. And about 45% of the people said why they hadn't voted had something to do with accessibility. So they were too busy, it was out of town, they were ill, the weather was poor, they had trouble getting to the poll or something like that. And that's one of the reasons why you might think about internet voting as being one way to tackle this, because it might make accessibility better. So in closing, there are places around the world where the voter turnout is actually very high. So here's 2012, South Sudan earlier this year. Voter turnout in a place where people walked for hours and days. Illiterate, impoverished countries, 90% voter turnout. What's wrong with us? And of course, there are young people around the world that are prepared to fight and really struggle to vote. So I thank you, and I hope you will share my concern in really beginning to think about what we can do to improve the voter turnout in our country. And I think, speaking as a former elected official, I implore you to really set your minds to this and think about how we can keep our democratic system healthy and alive. And I welcome this discussion on internet voting.
Thank you, Rob. Good afternoon. My name's Stephen. I'm actually the acting deputy clerk for the city of Markham. And I'm here with Tio today to review Markham's experience with internet voting, because we actually have used internet voting for 3 municipal elections. So why internet voting? In 2003, Markham was the first municipality in Canada to introduce online voting. It was seen as part of a comprehensive voter engagement strategy to utilize technology and increase participation in Markham elections. It was hoped that internet voting would positively impact voter turnout. Online voting was seen as offering flexibility and convenience for a variety of lifestyles, such as commuters, business travelers, snowbirds, etc. It was also hoped that it would actually help improve youth engagement in the voting process. And finally, it was seen as an opportunity to improve accessibility for voters with numerous different disabilities. Some legislative considerations. In Ontario, local municipalities under Section 42 of the Municipal Elections Act are actually permitted to decide on their own if they want to offer alternative voting methods. This goes to the provincial government of Ontario's choice to let local governments decide within their own spheres how best to operate those spheres. So our councils have the right to authorize by bylaw. Now the legislation says alternative voting such as vote by mail or telephone, but because it's a non-prescriptive statement of such as, our councils are able to authorize, at the request of the municipal clerk, internet voting. Markham is a fairly large municipality, 16th largest in Canada. It's a very diverse municipality. But internet voting has not only been deployed in a large, highly connected municipality such as Markham. In 2010, you can see here the range of different size municipalities in terms of population who have successfully deployed internet voting. I'm just going to quickly look at our election model to help you understand how we deploy internet voting. It's the same model that we have used in 3 municipal elections today. It's a cost-efficient model. It's a green model. It supports accessibility and diversity considerations, and it's a multi-channel model engaging a broad spectrum of voters. We offer online or internet voting during the early voting period only. We offer in-person voting using traditional paper ballots but tabulators during the early voting period and on voting day. No other election model has been contemplated by us or proposed in 2010, but we are actually always open to exploring new multi-channel ways of voting to meet those original strategies of the voter engagement and engaging our voters. Our election model is not something we came up with and just threw out there. It was actually reviewed by an eminent professor at York University, Dr. Henry Kim, who actually reviewed our model and said that based on his literature and academic assessment, our model actually was a really good one. He had also actually taken done a previous study of risk assessment of various voting channels and found that essentially internet voting was no more riskier than any other type of voting system. The key is, and I think every speaker has said it thus far, there is risk in any voting system, including in-person voting. There are risks of personation and several other risks with in-person voting in any other type of system. The key is to identify, understand, and manage those risks. I will say, though, that it is very important to remember that independent electoral jurisdictions are going to have to determine what their own level of risk tolerance is. This slide just depicts some of the risks of in-person voting. We've got some risks by vote by mail. But the bottom line, of course, is that risks have to be managed and mitigated, and that's where your election officials come in, and they need to identify those early, identify them often, and always work to avoid them. One of the reasons why, and I would suggest especially a local municipality might choose internet voting, is it's cost efficient. This slide depicts our 2010 election budget. I'm sure you probably noticed that little bullet at the bottom there that internet voting cost 81 cents per elector versus $5.63 per elector in the in-person voting. If you have a tight budget, that's a pretty good difference, and actually it's one of those risk trade-offs. How much are you willing to save your municipality cost-wise in order for the other risks? These are just some of Markham's online voting statistics. This actually has two statistics. It's called registration and voters. So one of Markham's risk mitigation strategies is a two-step authentication process. Voters actually have to register their intent to vote online before they're actually provided to vote, the opportunity to vote online. I talked about convenience. Here you'll see that for those that travel, online voting is really convenient. We had 84 electors in 2010 who voted outside of North America. Demographically, it's actually similar to what you see in a regular election in terms of turnout. Young voter turnout was actually low. You know, that sort of that middle, I guess you'd call it the middle age. I don't like using that term, but that middle age category was pretty high. But what's interesting, of course, is that we had an over 80-year-old voting online in 2010. This slide depicts our overall turnout in the 3 elections that we have used internet voting. But I should say at this point, because there's been a lot of discussion here today about, improving voter turnout. Markham actually no longer sees internet voting as a way to improve voter turnout. There is no one single way to improve voter turnout. There are complex issues. It's not just channels of voting. It's, whether you have a hot mayor's race. It's overall voter engagement. It's a multi-channel answer to the question of voter turnout, but we do believe that multi-channel opportunities to vote can at least help the process. This is important. After our 2010, and actually in 2006, we actually surveyed all those who voted online. 99% were satisfied or very satisfied with the online voting experience. 99% would likely vote at either a provincial or federal election if the option was provided to vote online. 91% voted from home. But what we found interesting was that 92% of candidates indicated that they were in favor of internet voting, and 78% of candidates indicated that the option of internet voting had a significant impact on how they ran their campaign. Just going to quickly talk about our online voting experience. As I said, we use a 2-step registration process. Helps with that verification that Harry talked about. Voters actually have to register. We send them a letter with a special PIN. They have to go online to register to vote and select a personal PIN. We have authentication measures built in. They have to provide their date of birth and not only the PIN on the letter that we provide them. And that's just an example of the letter. After they register their intent online through the authentication process, we actually send them another letter with a brand new PIN. So that original PIN is not what they use to vote. Included in that second letter is actually the URL for the voting site, which was not Google indexed anywhere, so another security feature.
I have a friend that used to write programs for Microsoft, and we've had discussions about that. He also agreed there's not a system online that you can guarantee security. How can you guarantee it?
Okay.
I'm going to answer that question from a policy perspective. You can't, but neither can I guarantee you the security of the in-person vote. Neither can I guarantee you the security of telephone voting. Neither can I guarantee you the security of mail-in ballots. Each of these systems of voting, including online voting, has inherent risks. I tried to make the point clear that, as long as obviously you have to identify your certain level of risk tolerance. But the key is to identify those risks, and there are always mitigation strategies. And I think my colleague Teo made it very clear that there are a range of security issues when it comes to internet voting, and there are actually a range of mitigation strategies. Is it perfect? Absolutely not, but neither is in-person voting.
My predecessor, where I work right now, came to my office and said, Guillermo, we have a really old and paper-based system. I want to change that. And I says, great, let's do it online. Let's try to go online and do online voting. And of course, then she mentioned, oh, by the way, we have legislation that tells us we cannot do that. So in other words, what I've done is I asked her, Mary, what do you think are the challenges that we're having right now? And the challenges were quite simple at the beginning. They wanted to avoid multiple votings, because in Nanaimo you have about 18 polling stations, and technically I could go to those 18 polling stations and cast a vote, which would create a nightmare for the legislative service departments to compile all that information and void all those votes. In addition to that, it was a very slow process to show the results online. So the elections were finished at about 8 p.m., and many times we needed to wait until the next morning to put the results up. So the media was up in arms, and of course City Council and the people running were really excited about what the official results were. And also the task of getting to changes on the voters list was very time consuming as well. What we figured is that you needed to come to City Hall to do a change. If you have an address, that information would have to go back to BC Elections until we were provided with the final voter list. So for the city of Nanaimo was really a logistical challenge to be able to run an election as a paper-based. So then we put our brains together and decided, let's do this online. Internet will provide a way to allow us to do all this and still sticking to the legislations and not actually do the part where you're actually voting. So let me run you through the process. What we've done is we partner with all the different schools and city facilities that we had in the city of Nanaimo, and we made sure that we have internet connections for once, and it works. And believe it or not, some of this experience may be a challenge when we go to 2014 if we ever get to online elections. You need to have an internet connection that really works. And it's easier said than done. Some of the school districts, they have a very challenging firewall settings, so sometimes it was very challenging to actually get to the internet. So what we've done is we basically created an application that was going to be based on the internet basically, and the idea was that we're going to be registering the people as they come in. So the first goal was to eliminate the double voting. So we wanted to have a central database where everybody in Nanaimo can go to vote anywhere in the city, but as soon as they come in, they will be asked for their ID, and that person will be checked in our system. So that looked like this. So primarily, John Smith will come to the door. Our application will basically check it in. We'll query the database, make sure that person hasn't been checked in anywhere else. And of course, if that's the person who says on the ID, we'll give them a number, and then that person will move on to the next section, which is basically to comply with the legislation that it says that you actually have to have a signature on the voters book. So with the ID of that person, which we'll show over here. So you can see over there that it says computer registration, which says yes, and there's an ID number code 12345. So that person will go to the next table. When we get to the next table, then what we do is we actually ask physically to sign. So we're okay with legislation over there. And at that moment, that person will be given a ballot, and that they will go and vote on the actual voting machines. So the registration really was a very easy process. Each one of the polling stations had about 2 to 4 computers, depends on the volume that we were expecting in those stations. As a learning curve, we realized that some of the polling stations, they needed more computers, so we have about 20 computers standby. So if one station was getting very busy, our IT department will deploy an extra computer so we can deal with the lineups and parking issues and all that kind of stuff outside the polling stations. It went really smooth. We're starting this in 2002. We really ran quite a few elections and referendums, and we never have an issue with anything in regards to the check-in. So then, when we got to the ballot, that person will go to the secret room and just put their selections and come up to the machine and put it inside. And about 8 p.m., when the elections were closed, the election officials will come and they will basically run the latest results of the application. So that machine that you see on the screen, it will speed up a ticker tape that it has all the counts for mayor and council, and all those information was actually typed in later on the second part of our application, which basically will be displaying the results. So this is the result that it looks like. So we'll be in an auditorium similar to this. In that auditorium, we'll invite media, members of the public, of course, people running for council or for mayor. There will be a lot of excitement in the room because as the different polling stations were closing, that information will be changing dynamically. In all the elections that we have since 2002, we were able to provide unofficial results to the people in less than 15 minutes. So for us, it was fantastic. For the city council, it was also fantastic. Of course, we saw some sad faces really quickly, but beyond that, we also see a lot of happy faces as well, where they're getting their name up over there as soon as the polling stations were closed. So some of the experience that we can take from here, we have great acceptance from the public because now the process is pretty straightforward. They will come to the polling stations, we check for the name, and it was a very quick and easy process. We work really closely with the Legislative Services Department. So for those people about thinking in this room about going to an online system, work really closely with them, your IT department, because that partnership is key. We started in this process for about a year before the elections. There's a lot of stuff that need to be considered, computers, internet connection, even power. 1 year in one election, we have snow, which in Nanaimo is really rare, and it took the power down half of the city. So now we have no internet connection, we have no power, and people still needed to vote. So in regards to that, also make sure you have a backup system. In our case, it was a paper-based backup system, and a whole bunch of different Excel spreadsheets on the computers as well, just in case the internet connection went down. Logistics needs to be addressed as well. It takes quite a bit of time to coordinate getting all those machines to all the schools and so forth, but it's a really fun process when you do it properly. Nothing is perfect. If you ask me what failed or what were the successes, lots of successes, but we always find that once in a while, human error could be a factor. And of course, that human error cannot be avoided. It's always going to be there. But at the end of the day, I think the benefits really overcome the challenges. Thank you.
So, my name is John Jack. I'm an elected councillor with the Huu-ay-aht First Nations. I'm serving my second term. What I'll say about the Huu-ay-aht First Nations is that we are a small community of roughly 700 people. Actually, it's more like 730 people, located on the west coast of Vancouver Island. We're about an hour and a half by gravel road from Port Alberni. And one thing I will say is that we are a member of the Nuu-chah-nulth culture group. It's not necessarily a unified political entity, although we do have an association called the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council. The best analogy that I can make about this community of communities per se is that it's a lot like the way ancient Greece was like. There's 14 tribes, pretend it's like the city-states in Greece, spoke the same language, had the same spirituality, had the same types of relationships before contact that ancient Greece had. So take that as you will. Our community is quite dispersed in that of the 700 people that live on treaty settlement, or those that live on treaty settlement lands, it's roughly 15%, which means quite a few people live away from our territory, which means that we have some serious considerations regarding engaging with our own citizens and having them participate politically. Through the treaty, we are a community of the rule of law. It's something in the treaty that mandated that we have to have our own constitution and our own suite of laws, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're participating in this way. In British Columbia, there are some legislative difficulties in accessing electronic formats of democracy and participation. We are not constrained by those same laws. Through the Constitution of Canada, we have treaty rights now, and those rights, part of that, allow for us to create our own Government Act, our own Financial Administration Act, our own Elections Act, and they were drafted in such a way that enable us to look at these technologies in terms of getting to our people, because we are dispersed, and at some point we would like to see them less dispersed, but we have to deal with realities. our land is owned collectively. And anytime we wish to put forward the notion of selling land over $1 million, it has to go before a popular vote. So the People's Assembly requires 25% of all eligible voters in order for us to have quorum. And quorum is perhaps the most important aspect of why we've chosen to go about this. With 85% of our people living away from our territory, the other part of that is the People's Assemblies, as they're written in the law now, must be held on treaty settlement lands, which means that we have to get people from all over the island, as well as from the lower mainland, to a spot an hour and a half by gravel road from Port Alberni. And that is a logistical nightmare, and it also scares the heck out of the charter buses that we contracted to do it. So some of the people that we had coming in from the mainland, their days of travel was upwards of 9 hours, and that's somewhat unacceptable for those people, especially for the elders. So we needed to find ways to make things more accessible and allow people to participate principally. And because of our laws, and because of the enabling sections of our laws, we're allowed to do so electronically, and that's what we're looking to do. So another important part of the People's Assemblies are that they can also make non-binding but still very powerful and important resolutions that guide the government, or warn the government that perhaps we should go in one direction or not. Sadly, though, at our first People's Assembly of November of last year, we lost quorum, and as a result could not get to those sections. The way the agenda was stated is that we got to all of the mandatory things that we got to, and 1 or 2 of the resolutions, but not all of them. And that left a bit of a sore spot with our people. And in response to that, we needed to have a way to allow for our people to participate more meaningfully. So we do have electronic opportunities, and it can single-handedly address a lot of the logistical challenges. At the time of my creation of this, we saw a couple instances of what we could do. We're really excited because we hope that this will address our quorum problems, but also help raise the opportunity for our people's voices to be heard and for questions to be answered. And I believe that is the last slide. Thank you very much.
Yes, voting on the internet by the 2014 municipal elections would better facilitate access to electoral system. We could advance a step further by participating on a system of perpetual direct democracy. This innovative system is explained in more detail by a booklet entitled Perpetual Direct Democracy, published by Amazon.com. You can also read the idea of perpetual direct democracy online at pacific.ca. Direct democracy is about shifting the traditional empowering of political representatives into citizens, keeping the right to legislate our own laws by referendum. The question is, are you ready for direct democracy?